What's up, folks? Justin Garcia, aka Master Chim here, and I am here with my friend, or at least has been a friend of my head for a few years now, Mr. Matt Flavel of the Asatru Folk Assembly. Matt, you want to say what's up to the listeners?
Hey guys, it's an honor to be on your program. Like Justin said, it feels like I've known him for a while now, even though it's the first time we're actually talking.
That's right. And I know your wonderful wife has been a participant on a lot of the podcast stuff, and it became a familiar name. And then seeing, through mutual friends through social media, I see, who's connected to who. So it's very, I feel like I've known you for some time, even though this is technically the first time we've ever had a conversation. Now, your title, All's Hair Yargothi of the
Perfect.
AFA. What does that title entail? And then we'll backtrack. I really just wanted to say the word before, or in case I forgot how to pronounce it so early on. So let's get what that title
is. You did perfect. You did.
Appreciate it.
You did better than most people. Phonetically, it's an Icelandic or an Old Norse word that means basically the hair is the war band, the hair yar is the warrior. It means the Gothi for all of the warriors. Honestly, as it is today, I'm basically the high priest of the Asatru Folk Assembly. I'm the CEO of the 501c3 church that we operate under, and spiritually, I'm the head of our church.
Right. And is that what you do, for lack of a better phrase? Is that what you do for a living?
That is what I do full time. My small housing allowance, I don't think really counts as a living, but yeah, that is what I do full time now, running the AFA. It's really nice. We've gotten big enough now that it requires that kind of maintenance. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. So we're going to backtrack somewhat and start, I guess, at the entry level for the layman, the person who is either of a different religious, flavor, or people who are just not exposed to what you do at the AFA. What is Asatru?
Asatru is the pre-Christian faith of most of Europe. I guess it's under the broad category of paganism, though I don't hold myself to have much in common with the way that term's used these days. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's basically what it is. People would be very familiar with it. We call our gods by the names familiar to the Norse people. So Odin, Thor, Frey.
Right. And now, pre-Christian, that's something of significance. As the Christian, marketing team toward Europe, things tended to change. And, obviously, the majority of, and I say majority just as a speculation, I don't know if that's actually the case, but a significant portion of Europe became Christian once that was introduced. What was the return to the pre-Christian roots? Why was there, and I've had Steve McNallen on before. He and I had a great conversation a few years back, but to reintroduce everybody again, why is it that there was a return? Why was there felt a need to return? And what was the impetus for that,
Well, one thing, when Christianity first made its way north into Europe, it had to be altered very significantly from Paul's church, or the church in the Middle East, because European people, their mindset was very different. So you see early medieval Christianity adopt so much of European paganism to make it palatable to a European audience. Well, over the 1,500 to 500, depending on where you're at in Europe, years worth of conversion and movement there, the Christianity slowly lost a lot of that European paganism, or the stuff that really spoke to the European folk soul, and became much more about universal brotherhood and turning the other cheek, and basically a spirituality that was very foreign to the soul of European people. All the nobility that Europe had been built on is kind of slowly eroded by Christianity, and we found ourselves in modern times in a place where a lot of European folks weren't served by the church. Christianity didn't really fill that need in their soul. And I think a lot of people discovered that around the same time. But with the reawakening of Asatru, and you mentioned Steve McNallen coming on your program, in the late 60s and early 70s, he kind of put a name to it and gave it some direction and made that happen and made it take off. And if it wasn't for him and his vision he had back then, I certainly wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing.
Right. So I understand Christianity. Like, why did Christianity morph into that? I would say, based on a lot of my own framing of my relationship, my understanding of the world, they were on mission. And once, Europe was sort of on board, the greater mission then became, well, how do we now bring everybody to the point where there are no real anomalies or even differences between people, and how eventually there are going to be certain groups that may have been, spoken to in a certain way to have them, appreciate and come on board, how that became less of a priority for the greater mission. And so that makes sense. But now, having said that about Christianity, what is the mission of Asatru?
It's a complex question, but I think it's a really important one. I suppose the mission of Asatru is different depending upon the time and the place of the European folk. Right now, the mission has been to reawaken our people to an authentic faith of European descended people and to bring us back home spiritually to that. I think that one of the fundamentals in that mission always is what Asatru means. It means troth or loyalty to the Aesir. And I think that reconnecting the sons and daughters of Europe with our native spirituality is extremely important. I think that's the goal. And then see the success and the flourishing of our folk to where, European descended peoples can be happy, fulfilled, build a noble character, regain the kind of ability to hold our head up and put our chest out and carry ourselves with presence and nobility. I think that's certainly always been a fundamental goal of Asatru.
Right. What's the difference between Asatru or being an Asatruer and being a heathen? Heathenism and Asatru. Is there a distinction to be made? Is it just semantic?
Linguistically, no, but there's certainly commonalities, at least in the United States, and how that's referred to. Very often, the word heathen's taken on a lot in the middle part of the country, it seems, kind of regionally. It doesn't... I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it without being disparaging. The term
it's not the best word for the group? Is that the idea?
A lot of people like it. I liked it early on. But the commonality of people who tend to call themselves heathen are the kind of no rules, we do whatever we want, backyard barbecue, just have a good time on the weekends group. Certainly not everybody that uses that word. That seems to be a commonality with it. When I find people using the term Asatru, they're very often affiliated with the Asatru Folk Assembly. They tend to worship in a more structured way and have a group identity rather than a very loose, unaffiliated presence within the community, I guess.
Right. Are there any other groups that represent Asatru other than the AFA?
I suppose that depends if you want to ask them. Yeah, there certainly are. The Odinic Rite, I think, represents Asatru. They would call it Odinism, but fundamentally it's the same thing. I think the Asatru Alliance represents a version of Asatru, certainly a very prominent version of what Asatru was like back in the 80s or the 90s. Any of the universalist outfits that would tell you that they're Asatru, I would dispute that claim very heavily.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm sure there's any other small number of groups that I'm unaware of that probably authentically practice too.
Right. Now, the actual phrase or term, though, Asatru, that was coined by McNallen, yeah?
He found it in a book, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book that he read that put a name to it. It was a book that he read back in the late 60s, maybe around 1970, but you'd have to check with Steve. Mm-hmm. But it was a book describing the religion of the Vikings, and it was described as Asatru. And so he used that term. I know they use that term in Iceland as well, and I think they started using it around the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, you personally, from what I understand, you have been involved in Asatru for some time, obviously, given your position in the organization. But like most people, I also don't think that you were born into this. You know, it's something that you found. You want to give us some background on that?
Well, yeah, real quick, what's really cool to watch happen in the Asatru Folk Assembly now is we're having kids, we're starting to have teenagers that are becoming adults that were born into it, which is a really nice thing to say because, you know, people my age and older, that's not the case. My family, I guess, was Christian because you had to check a box, but they were never very religious. You know, they didn't really practice. As I grew up, I always felt that I had a spiritual need. I felt there was something there that I needed. And, you know, being a white young man in the United States of America, I thought those are my options. You know, I'm not a Jew. I'm not, you know, so that's not open to me. I'm not a Muslim. Okay, I'm not Indian, so I can't be a Hindu or a Buddhist. What do we got? So I kind of picked through that, and I was pretty serious with it for a while. I picked up my Bible and I read it through about 4 different times because a lot of stuff didn't fit well. But you assume, you know, if God says one thing and you say something else, you're probably the one wrong. So I went back and checked it out for quite a while. I spent a lot of time growing up with, you know, in my later teenage years, and I guess my early adult years with my aunt and my cousins. She was a very devout Jehovah's Witness. Right. One thing I would give those people, they know their Bibles. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing that I genuinely respect about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's probably some other denominations that do it as well, but they went through and they took out all the pagan elements of Christianity that make it fun and exciting for European people. And they threw all those away. And so theirs seems like a much more accurate representation of what, you know, the church that Paul intended would look like today. And that really helped me make a clear understanding of where I wanted to be and where I didn't. I got to a point when I took it real serious. When I was about 18 or 19, I got baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. I went door to door a little bit. I was one of those guys.
I had a conversation the other day with one on my deck.
You know, go big or go home. If you believe it and you're going to try to do it, you got to go with your whole heart. And that's what I tried hard to do. And at that time, it occurred to me that everything that a young man wants to do is sinful and the antithesis of what Jesus would have you do. Right. And something else that helped me a lot around that time was the Christian bookstore kind of Christians had the whole "what would Jesus do" thing. Right. So I started looking at things in my life in terms of what would Jesus do. And very often, what would Jesus do and what's the right thing to do weren't the same and didn't match up. Right. So, you know, I tried hard to beat that square peg into the round hole as much as I could, but I realized at some point that it was dishonest. And if the Christian God was omnipotent and knew what was in my heart, then I'm not going to just be a hypocrite. I'm not going to fool God by saying one thing and believing another. Right. And it really got me thinking. And I came to a point which was terrifying for me because I believed in it. But their God was so opposed to the things that I believe in and such a bad person, for lack of a better term, literally thinking that the only option was their God or not was pretty scary. Right. And I made that decision that I couldn't stand with their God because he was just a bad person. And that's why the story of King Radbod always really stood out to me, because he was putting his foot in the baptismal font. He was about ready to sacrifice all the old gods, whatever, were my ancestors. And when told they were all burning in hell, he said, I'd rather burn in hell with my ancestors than go to heaven with a parcel of beggars. I'm out. And that's kind of where I felt like I was. So I departed from Christianity, and I still had that spiritual need inside of me. I knew there was something out there bigger. And so I was, okay, well, I know Christianity is not native to my people. It's not native to Europeans. So what did we have before? And then I started discovering, and it was funny because at first I thought I was the only weirdo that was doing this. I was by myself, but I wanted to research things, and I figured I'd get, old primary sources, what we call today the lore. But I was Googling things, and I found, this guy, Steve McNallen, and this group, the Asatru Folk Assembly, and there was other people actually doing this in real life, and they weren't a bunch of freaks. And I was shocked and amazed, and that was kind of the start of my journey, and that was 2001.
Right, right. So that's some time. And I guess, fast forwarding from there or through from there to now, it was just a matter of becoming a more significant, playing a more significant role in the church. And is that how you would refer to it, to the church?
It is, and that's off-putting to some people, but certainly here in the United States, it has a meaning.
Right.
And when you tell people, "Oh, what were you doing?" "Oh, I was with my group, my national organization of people."
Right.
Nobody knows what that is, and they turn you off. "Oh, I was at a church event." "Oh, really? What did you guys do?"
Right.
It has that word and it has that meaning. And honestly, church is derived from a European word anyway. It's not a Hebrew term.
Right. Right. So personally, and I don't know if you've ever heard my story, but a lot of parallels in that I was also raised by a non-religious Christian family, and from as early as I can remember, I had a more atheistic worldview because I went to Catholic school. We were raised Catholic, and I was baptized. I did communion. The sacrament after that is confirmation. You're confirmed. It's like, yeah, you actually exist. You find out later in life, right? So I never did the confirmation. At that point, I was already saying, no, this isn't for me. I don't agree with this. I don't like, this is nonsense. And I had a very rebellious, attitude towards it. That continued, I think, and developed into a hardline anti-theist by the time I was in my 20s and even early 30s. And it got to the point where, similar to you, where you were like, I was all in with Christianity and then I had to basically just go against that. Well, I was the guy who was like in the early internet forum days. I had a legendary thread on this prominent forum in the martial arts community. And the thread was Chim's atheist thread. And it was just religion bashing. And I ran that for years. And then I had children. And then I started realizing, as my mission developed, that there were things that just didn't make sense. There were answers that I knew I was opting out of pursuing because the questions had to be asked from a certain perspective, and that perspective wasn't one I was willing to put on. And my own personal experiences as they sort of evolved, and I started reassessing what was important to me and what I've always known to be true. I was introduced to the Eddas by a friend of mine in passing, and the reading of it, it's like it felt like it was my crew. Like, wait a minute, these guys, I know these guys. This is what I'm saying. Like, where are these guys? These are the guys who are looking at things the way that felt familiar to me and natural to me from as long as I can remember. But it was very much an individual journey. Well, to this day, and I am somebody who has had very, very skeptical, I should say I have a very skeptical perspective of groups and organizations. So one of the things, like with the AFA, that has always, given me a sort of pause, meaning I didn't want to go past a certain point of acceptance or rejection because I knew nothing about it, obviously, was how does a spiritual endeavor, a pure spiritual endeavor, not succumb to the bureaucracies, the administrative obstacles? Again, going according to a lot of my framework and philosophies, an organization always has two missions. First is the mission it was founded for, and the second is staying alive, right? So you'll see that with a lot of government agencies. It starts off with the best of intentions, but before long, people have to keep their jobs. So the problem they were hired to solve can never end, or else they lose their job. And just as an example of that idea. But in the AFA, how does one, but you're the guy, so how do you avoid becoming the bureaucracy? How do you avoid becoming the guy that I see on 3 a.m. in the Christian church with the Lamborghini? Like how does that not happen?
Well, I think there's things that are fundamentally different that help it not happen. First, I'm not turning down Lamborghinis, but I don't see a lot of those coming my way. But secondly, when you create an organization to react against something or to fix a problem, then you're right. That problem has to continue to exist in order for that organization to have value. So you look for it everywhere, and it becomes a little bit corrupted by that. One of the things that's important to me about the AFA is we're all about building. We're not about tearing something down. So you'll have groups that are all about, women's liberation or this and that. Once you get to a certain point, what do? Well, then I think you start reaching for problems.
Right.
I'm not trying to bring down the patriarchy.
Right.
I'm trying to build stuff that's spiritually relevant for our folk. And I think as long as there's, the sons and daughters of Europe exist, we'll have spiritual needs that hopefully I can help provide for now, and that we can build the AFA in a way that it'll provide for then. But we're trying to build up our folk and make our folk strong and successful. And I think there's always a need for that. Certainly we got to run, we got to keep the lights on, we've got to do a lot of administrative things. And I don't see anything fundamentally wrong with that. I think that one thing is important with the gods of Asatru is we're about winning, not about putting it all on, leaving it all to God, and maybe we'll store up treasures in heaven. No, we're going to try to build an important and a lasting legacy here now in Midgard. Part of that is making what we have successful. And so there's always a certain amount of administrative things that need to be done, but I don't find that fundamentally in conflict with spiritual pursuit. You mentioned early in a purely spiritual endeavor. One of the things I like about Asatru is it's not purely spiritual. It makes all things spiritual. It's not, all right, here's everyday, work, family stuff, time, and then on Sunday we go to the Hof and practice Asatru. Asatru should incorporate all the things you do in your life, in how you work, in how you successfully structure an organization. One of the other things, the Aesir are gods of order and of structure. Odin literally took the chaos that surrounded him and formed reality out of it and formed order and structure. So I think administering an orderly, hierarchical church organization is very much in keeping with the principles of Asatru and in providing order in a world that we see is very chaotic.
Right. Solid. So something you touched on, and something that I brought up with Steve McNallen when he was on, is the folkish versus universal perspectives of Asatru, of Odinism. My particular take, and I am in a very, I would say, unique in this context, not unique generally, but I'm of a mixed, heritage. And one of the things I recall hearing from my mother growing up, so my mother, Irish Italian, my father, born and raised in Puerto Rico, he a lot more mixed than my mother. And I always heard from my mother, well, you have the best of both worlds. You have, it was great. And obviously she's my mom. I love my mom, right? But she didn't grow up like I grew up. So when I was with the white kids, I was the Puerto Rican kid. When I was with the Puerto Rican kids, I was the white boy. And so it was I was very conscious of this growing up. And I think that's the greater point that I'm making first, is that I was always very conscious, just functionally, from a very young age about race and about ethnic groups and about cultures. And it's funny because as my younger brother, and I do have a younger brother, and I grew up, I have always gravitated toward and connected toward, more toward my European blooded family, whereas my brother didn't, and he and I, and you see us, and, we look very similar, we act very similar, he is my little brother, but our identities are very different, they're very varied. So when the conversation of universal versus Völkisch, started, coming to the forefront of the Asatru world, at least represented in social media and such, like I got it, I understood it. And my whole thing, and again, I brought it up with Steve McNallen, and he definitely had a lot to say about it, a lot of productive, strong stuff to say about it. He said, why would you not want to connect with the people, with the gods of your people? Why would you want to connect with the gods of other peoples? And so I get it. And, and the reason I'm saying this before you give me your thing is anybody, because I'm sure they're going to be haters, just
of course,
this hanging on every one of your words. And I want to put out there, as somebody who is of a mixed heritage, who has the last name Garcia, whose father looked like Morgan Freeman by the time the middle of the summer came. Like, I am somebody who understands that there is almost an illogical slant on the person that says it doesn't matter, who your people's gods were, and you could pretty much. And my whole thing is, we talk about the Black Viking, right? On the podcast, we've talked about that before as sort of like an archetype, the Black Viking. My whole thing is, you could do whatever the hell you want, but don't get mad when nobody accepts you, and that's the whole thing. Like, do whatever the hell you want, but you want entry into this group, and that's where the problem comes in. And I think people should respect and honor other individuals' identities. And part of that is including the identities that don't welcome yours into their group. And it needn't be something controversial or violent or, even, having any animus or malice. It's just what makes sense, So all that being said, what's your or AFA's take on that as of 2019?
That's a broad question. In specific, and I kind of touched on this earlier, I think there's an authentic way to practice Asatru, and I think that there's ways that are inauthentic. And I think that the universalist perspective is extremely inauthentic. And I think that for a lot of different reasons, because it doesn't just include their folkish stance or not. It goes with a whole other social justice packaging.
Tranny Vikings.
They have all of that in there. Right. Used to be they liked the tranny Vikings, and that was cool to have one. Right. Now it's almost you've got to be a tranny Viking or they don't like you. And that's evolved pretty rapidly. No, I like your take that you said. It's about trying to enter somebody's group. Groups have standards that they are completely entitled to set. Nobody's out trying to tell them they can't do what they're going to do. It's ironic because the forces of tolerance are the only ones out there trying to tell other people what they can't do. People are going to connect with the divine in the ways that give them the most meaning. And I think it's authentic for all peoples to look to the gods of their ancestors and pursue spirituality in that way. You're right. It puts folks like yourself in a difficult spot, because if it's a mixed ancestry, which way do you go? Because each group doesn't accept you're not quite one of them, and it makes it really tricky. So, I mean, that's obviously a challenge for a lot of people. But what I think is that's an understandable challenge. What I don't feel is a challenge, but I feel is a mental illness, is if you're straight from Norway and that's your ancestors since the dawn of time, but all of a sudden you want to go, practice tribal Central African religion,
right? It
begs the question, why? What's going on within you that you feel the need to get your validation out there? And I think that's an important question that I wish more people would explore and think about.
Right on. And I agree. My whole thing was, I remember there was an episode of the Pressure Project that I did called Pure Blood Nonsense. And one of the things that I spoke about in that episode was, there are going to be people who, because as somebody of mixed heritage, the people who would, when I would grow up and they would say, well, you're not part of my group because you're mixed. I would say, well, by that logic, I'm part of no group then, right? So I'm my own group. I'm a different group. So I very early on stopped trying to get into groups that like didn't welcome me. Like, I don't fucking, I'll do my own thing, because it is, I would say, a winning attitude, right?
Yeah.
And I would draw the distinction between somebody who has an attitude of, I'm going to make my way and build my tribe organically, functionally, from scratch if need be, rather than being the people of, you see what's happening in Europe now. Well, these are people that, they all have the pure blood. Why is it that they're welcoming, these invaders? Why are they sabotaging the beautiful history of their peoples and, their cultures and, their languages and their religions? And why is this being sabotaged? So my point being, anybody could succumb to weak thinking. And when you embrace strength in a way that's most functionally authentic for you as an individual. And I think that is a huge struggle that people have these days. Like, it's not about, I want to be an Asatru because they represent strength, but how would you represent strength? Would it be with Asatru? Would it be with your native, people's religion? Like, why are you trying to just put on ironically, a strength shirt, right? Instead of actually becoming strong. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's a really important point, and I think it touches on something that I think is a little bit broader. When people see other people doing better than them or having things they want, the solution is to take it away or tear it down or make the other person less. So by default, you're objectively more. And, that attitude is weak and it's disgusting, but it's very common today. If I see someone who has more or is doing better than me, it makes me want to do better. It makes me want to rise to that challenge and become more myself. I wish more people would do that. I wish more people all over would do that when they see a problem. When they see someone that has something they want, well, go out and make that. Go out and build that. Don't not allow anyone to have nice things because you're not willing to step up and establish that for yourself.
Right.
And I think that comes into play in a lot of things, not just Asatru, but I think it's a spiritual principle that people have lost a lot. It's kind of it's a communist thing of let's make everybody equal by bringing everyone down to the lowest level.
Right. Least common denominator. And I think it's I have this paradigm called the aquarium, and I think a lot of people nowadays don't realize that they live in an aquarium and in a functional reality where we're thrust into dealing with nature and natural law alone. Everything tends to sort itself out pretty quickly. If you're the guy who is the crazy racist, black people are niggers, black people this, black people, and you are on an island and it's you and a black guy, and the only way that you're going to survive is you're going to find a way to build a bridge and become functional. So I think the person who is completely anti other races, and I'll use that as the category, or races don't exist on the other end, I think they functionally have, or I should say they have the same level of dysfunction. I think when we navigate reality and we look at what works, we look at what allows people to pursue their individual, preferences, but while still surviving, functionally, I think those are the formulas that all of our ancestors, no matter where you came from, had to develop. It had to work. And nowadays we lose sight of the aquarium effect, whereas a reality and a sense of security and safety is provided for you, and you want to sort of make the wheel rounder. I found a way to make a rounder wheel, and you have to listen to me. Well, the impetus for needing one was never there. It's just people looking for, I guess, significance, looking for things to do. And they wind up, throwing around accusations like racist and homophobic, and I've gotten them all. I know you have also. I was called by a little white lady in DC a few years back. I had gone to the MPI conference in DC and Richard Spencer's conference, and I was outside, and it's the first interaction I ever had with Antifa. I had no idea who Antifa was, right? And I remember going into this event, and this little white lady called me a white supremacist. and I did like the whole, like, who, me? And she goes, yeah, you're. And she goes, they're holding a white supremacist meeting in that building. And I told her, no, I'm going to the MPI conference. And she was like, that's the one. And she's sitting there, and I'm like, my last name's Garcia. My father's from Puerto Rico, and I grew up in the South Bronx. Like, you're calling me a white supremacist? Like, you're a little blonde lady. Like, have you ever been in a fight in your life? Have you ever like what is your connection to being able to qualify you to call me that? And it was just ridiculous. It was a joke. But it was my first experience seeing how delusional people could be. And I had to admit that I was almost in a bubble growing up where I grew up in, because super liberal New York City, super liberal, and I didn't realize until I was much older and had a little bit more of a cultured perspective on things, just how indoctrinated I was, and it was, cops are all bad, the rich white men ruin everything, and there was just this list of, things that we never questioned growing up where I grew up. And as I grew up, I realized that wasn't the case. I recall going into the building after, navigating the Antifa, and there was a black guy and a black lady there, and they were like in the information part of the building. Like, so I went up to them and I said, excuse me, do you guys know where the conference is being held? And, they're sitting there, and the lady goes, what conference? And I said, what conference? And she said, well, if you registered for it, you could find it yourself. I said, okay, fair enough. I said, by the way, this is the stuff we're going to be talking about upstairs. Just fucking with her, right? And I remember walking down the hallway, and I pressed the button for the elevator. I was like, I guess I'll just find it. And when the elevator opened, a bunch of guys that were at the conference looked and went, oh, Master Chim, what's up? And I looked back at the lady, and I said, found it, thanks. But it's one of these things where, people are unwilling to, number one, have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, be willing to acknowledge that you guys might not have the same position at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody just might not share your preferences, and that's okay. Just because I love me doesn't mean I hate you. I've been saying that for a while now. And I think, when you look at the controversy that I've seen as an outsider that AFA has gone through, it's purely that. It's like you're hating this group because they love themselves, and they don't want you to, they're not extending, themselves to you the way that you feel they should,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're spot on with it. I think there's certain people that are very comfortable with who they are and comfortable in their own skin. And then I think you have a situation in the world we live in today where there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable in their own skin. Rather than fix the things that make them uncomfortable or come to terms with them or whatever they need to do, it's easier and more socially available to try to force you to provide them validation. You don't just have to let them be to do whatever they want to do. No, you have to praise them and acknowledge that whatever they're doing is superior to what you're doing. And that's a bridge too far. With any of the things that get thrown around, it's very funny because if people go to an AFA event, there's not a lot of hate going on. There's a lot of hugging. There's some crying. There's some naming babies and having weddings, and there's not a lot of hate that goes on. It's just people that have a certain certain set of things we find acceptable within our group and things we don't within our group. And unfortunately, other people just can't allow that to exist in the same world they live in. And that's kind of a sad statement as to where we're at.
Right, right. How has the AFA grown since it was first founded and more recently?
Exponentially. That's how we've grown. No, we're doing fantastic right now, and grown in a lot of ways, I guess, since it was founded. You talked to Steve, and originally it was founded as the Asatru Free Assembly way back in 1972. And that went under, a number of different changes and kind of dissolved in the late 80s. The AFA, as we know it now, was founded in 1995. And then next year, we're about to celebrate 25 years. And it's grown in a lot of ways. When it first started out, there was a real need for, when we say it in 2019, the word reenactment sounds funny, but at a certain stage of development, we needed to look to the past to reconnect with something. And one of the ways that we've grown is we're kind of past that phase. We don't have the Viking dress up thing. It's not really about trying to be them. It's authentically being us. One of the cool ways that we've grown that I've pointed out a lot in the last 2 years, I'd say, is the number of women and families. Anyone who was around Asatru back in, the 90s, early 2000s, there's a lot of guys. There's a lot of single guys, and, maybe somebody would bring some strange looking wicked chick that they found. But in general, it was a lot of guys.
Right.
Now it's a lot of nice looking families, women, little kids, babies. One of the cool things the AFA has been doing is the baby blanket project. And my wife's been a big part of that. A member of ours in Florida named Janet's been a huge part of making that happen. But every new baby born in the AFA, the ladies of the AFA make them their own baby blanket and send them to them.
That's awesome.
Well, it's cool because one of the other things it does is it keeps kind of a running list. We've got like 17 babies like in the oven or just out right now to make blankets for just so far this year. And it's been really nice. One of the members of my Witten and I, he was asking, he said, when was the last time you saw an AFA event that didn't, a group picture that didn't either have a babe in arms or a pregnant lady in it? And I can't think of one.
Right.
So the family thing has grown huge. One thing, and I catch a little bit of grief for it sometimes, but we've also tried to professionalize our appearance a little bit. We talked earlier about, I used the word church. One of the things that goes with it is dress in a certain way, act in a certain way, and presenting ourselves with a certain amount of reverence. A lot of things in Asatru have evolved from being kind of a Viking-themed backyard barbecue. Don't get me wrong, I don't say it disparagingly, that's a lot of fun.
Right.
But taking that and making it a church weekend, making it something you're doing spiritually. So our people, dress a certain way, carry themselves a certain way. And one of the cool things, when you dress nice and you try to look nice, put your chest up, put your chin up, hold your head high. It really affects how you do things. And I think it affects how we approach the divine. And I think we've really felt that with the successes we've had. One of the other huge ways that we've grown, one project for a website I've been working on is archiving the old issues of the Runestone. For anybody who doesn't know, that was a publication the AFA had in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And it kind of talked about where we were at. And in these articles, I was reading back in the 70s, one of these days we'll have a Hof. One of these days we're going to have some land and we're going to have Hof and it's all going to be glorious. That was like 1973 was that article. But in 2015, we finally got that Hof. And that's been a real big game changer because we have our own.
What is a Hof?
Okay, for anybody, I get used to talking to a lot of people that have commonalities. For anybody in your audience, a Hof is basically our word for a church building, a temple to our gods. And previously to that, there's a lot of people that will call different things Hof. They'll get a shed from Home Depot and put it up in their backyard and decorate it. And I'm not taking anything away. That's great. That's a really cool step. But what I'm talking about Odenshof in California is a building that the community and people would recognize as this is a place of worship. And so we finally have that. And that's been a really special thing. We're able to pay off the mortgage on that in just 3.5 years. So that was awesome. And we're already right now scouting out and getting ready to get the second off. So that's been a really cool progress. Something else that's happened with the AFA and kind of in the way that it's grown. A lot more members and a lot bigger geographical spread. For a time, there was a couple pockets where we had really strong AFA communities, and then the rest was kind of no man's land. Now we've got AFA members in just about every state. We've got thriving communities all around the country. But something else, internationally, we've got a lot of members. We've got a kindred in Canada. We've got a kindred in Australia. We just got a kindred in South Africa, which is fantastic.
That's awesome.
We've got that going down there, and they're very enthusiastic folks. Got 3 kindreds in Sweden, and we have a kindred in Italy. And we've got members in 14 different countries. So we've really grown. I think we've grown spiritually, we've grown geographically, and certainly we've grown numerically. But one of the other cool things that one of our members was commenting on, usually you have to sacrifice quality for quantity. We've been really blessed that as our quantity's grown, our quality's grown and kept pace. And so we're really living in a good time for the AFA, and it's been really special to see that.
And I really do. I think it's a great thing. One of the things you touched on was family and how families is so important. And I know you and your wife, I remember I was doing some research in preparation for this interview, and a few years back it was, I think Mandy was referred to as your lovely mate or your lovely, like that. So it's great to see everybody's progressing along. But I remember even being at the MPI conference, right, a few years back, and a lot of people who are, Asatruers, heathen, Odinist, whatever they classify themselves, but basically under the same category, generally, none of them had any kids, and I, from the time being a teenager, I've wanted a large family. And one of the motivations for wanting that large family for me was always because if we're doing good things, strong things, productive things, we need, numbers. We need to support that. We need to make sure that the things that we believe in are represented, and we have the people who could participate in that at a high level. Did I lose you there, Matt?
Oh, no, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're
all right. My camera just looks like it's frozen.
Yeah, it'll probably reset.
Okay.
But, the big thing is nobody had any children. And when I look at a lot of people who are looked at nowadays as, I would say, leaders or influencers in the realm of Asatru, heathenism, Odinism, I see that, the value of family is not always put forward, and that was a great contrast to see AFA, in that it was something that you guys felt was significant, and you guys, the proof is in the pudding. Just like you said, the pictures, there's babies and women in the pictures, and it's not, a cool guy biker club. It's not a bunch of angry guys who just, want to rail against, how rough life is and such, or any other permutation of that, So I think that was something that was very endearing, that I found about the AFA, as an outside observer. Another thing that I wanted to ask about was, you're still there, yeah?
Yeah, I'm here. I've noticed my camera hasn't changed, but I'm here. I'm with you.
You know what? Why don't you just do me a favor, disconnect and reconnect, because I'm going to have to keep asking. Yeah, I think you're turning your camera on and off, maybe.
Okay, is this working?
Yep, you're there. All right. Or else I'd have to ask every couple seconds, you still there?
No worries, no worries.
So another thing that I want to ask about, and I recently had a friend, Jamie Martin, on, who was talking, I was asking him about his experiences with the law. And, one of the things that really made me or motivated me to have him on was, through his social media presence, I found that he was somebody who was very well educated, had a lot to say, read all the things that I either just haven't read or didn't have the inclination to read. And so he's a good source of information. Since I have you on, a big thing that I get into with Christians, and I am not anti-Christian. There are too many people who have too much overlap with my life's missions to disregard or disconnect from Christians. People identify themselves as Christians, but one of the things that I get in my own spiritual pursuits is, well, the Bible gives us morality. The Bible tells us what is good and what is bad, and I contrast that personally with, well, what is good and bad is functional. It's organic. It's, a lot of times we don't need it codified what we should be doing. It's like, I remember I used to be a personal trainer, and one of the things that I always get from fat people is, well, what should I eat? And I'd start off, the first part of that was, first of all, what you're not supposed to fucking be eating, right? So we could talk about maximizing the strategy, but if you have the cheeseburger at 3 a.m., probably not, So I think when it comes to morality, a lot of it is covered by what is functional and what we know to be, functional. In Asatru, in the lore, how do you, comment on, where morality is to be found? Is it found in law? Is it organic, inherent? What say you?
Well, I want to go back and build on your personal trainer analogy, because I think that's important. Personal trainers, it's funny because you wouldn't think you would need them. Right. Like you said, you know what you're supposed to eat. You know what you're not supposed to eat. We can Google right now and I can find your workout routine. What do you need a trainer for? But one of the things you need a trainer for is, first, somebody who can be an example, and for accountability. It's really different when you make me a meal plan and tell me what I can and can't eat than if I'm out there by myself making the decisions and I can cut myself a lot of slack. It's different when you have accountability. One of the things that I think is really cool about Asatru in general, and I'll get to the lore question in a second because I do remember that, but the accountability of a group. We all understand a certain amount of morality is inherent. But when you have a group of people, you got to look in the eye that have heard what you said, seen what you've done, and can hold you to a standard of whether or not they think you're somebody worthy of respect or not. That matters. Peer pressure, I listen to your show sometimes, and peer pressure is a thing, and it can be a very good thing when used towards noble ends.
That's right.
And I think that's something really important that Asatru provides. One of the things that the Lord provides is examples. It provides heroes in a way that you can see these people exhibiting these virtues that we talk about. And you can read stories of great people doing great things. One of the reasons I really like reading biographies much more than I like reading fiction. Because in fiction, your heroes have no challenges. You can create the story and the narrative however you want to make them come out on top. When you read biographies of actual people that have done inspirational things, it shows you what someone, similar to yourself could do if they applied themselves. And I think that the Lord gives us a lot of examples of people applying themselves. I think on a deeper level, one of the things that I love about the Eddas and some of the lore in that way, like the sagas are really good for inspiration. When you read the Eddas and things like that, it's neat because they're like an onion with how layered they are. And I find this myself, it's old hat. I've read the Eddas. I read those, 20 years ago. But every so often when I go back and reread something, I get blown away by something I didn't pick up the first time. So they're very deep and can be read on many different layers. And they're cool because they're accessible to children. If you read them as a child, you get an interesting story. You learn something. I don't presume that Thor is literally some buff, red-haired dude that drives a chariot. But if you're a child and you read that, you come to understand who Thor is better.
Right.
Well, the more you read in the Eddas, the more you pick up on deeper truths. And I think that's something special we have that the Bible may not have in that way. It's got very truths that are in your face. Do this, don't do that, which is really useful. But the Eddas you can keep going, and there's layers of truth, and there's truth that builds upon truth. It's not meant to be literal truth. but it tells truth in a lot of different ways and a lot of different layers. So I think it gives us that in a certain way. One of the things about the 9 noble virtues, that's kind of our list of some do's and don'ts, but it's really not. It's a list of do's, which I think is cool. It's not telling you all the things not to do. It's telling you standards to hold yourself to and traits that our community finds acceptable or worthy of praise. That's picked up through action. You talked about practicality being the test of a lot of values. Well, I think our virtues teach that in a very upfront way. Those are things that you use to structure a strong self, to structure a strong community, and to build a strong people. And that can only be done by using those values and putting them into practice.
Would you mind going over them briefly, if only just listing them? You know, I one of the things with that I like, I've done an episode, a 2-part episode on the 9 noble virtues, and I don't know if the AFA uses the same that was formulated by the Odinic Rite, or if you have your own slant on it. But one of the things that was prominent in those episodes that I made was everything that you're saying. That this is a proactive, you know, basically a formula, blueprint for strong, honorable living. And it isn't the rules of a game that somebody's handing down to you, where, you know, you don't necessarily see the purpose or function. You just know that I want to follow the rules. This, the Odinic Rites, the 9 noble virtues, was a list of things that would take any person and allow them to become a better version of themselves, you know?
Well, and I'll list them here in a sec, but one of the things that you touch on that's really important is that they're principles and not situationally dependent. They're not, you should do X on Sunday, but you shouldn't do Y on Friday.
Right.
They're a list of principles that should guide your actions and how you interact. And so, yes, we do use the same list of 9 noble virtues that the Odinic Rite came up with. And I wish I could just bust out the year that they came up with them, but they've kind of guided Asatru for a long time, and we do honor them. Now, different people use a little bit different words for the same thing sometimes, depending on what you read, but the 9 noble virtues are courage, discipline, fidelity, honor, hospitality, industriousness, perseverance, self-reliance, and truth. And, not only are those all good things that would take anybody and make them better, but they build upon each other and they build a synergy. They act in concert with each other. And so I think that's a very simple but a very powerful blueprint in being a more noble version of yourself.
Right on. I agree. I raised my sons, know the 9 noble virtues. My sons have, at least my older 2, have read the Eddas. It's a topic of conversation in my house. There are rituals that we perform, but again, a lot of this is I fall into the category of the guy who I wouldn't say is having the Viking barbecue in the back. I don't drink, but I am certainly the guy who has, from the onset of this particular leg of my journey, has pursued truths as I found them to be relevant, and I tried to stay honest to myself, during this process. But speaking of the 9 noble virtues specifically, it's something that I found have been a great blueprint. And I know there's some who, I know Jamie that I had on before and other people that I've spoken to, don't subscribe to it because, ascribe or subscribe, whichever word is more appropriate there, to it, because it was generated by the Odinic Rite. It wasn't something that was necessarily in the things. What's your take on that?
Well, so let me put this out there because I think it's interesting. You get a certain segment of folks that spend all their time focusing on the lore or archaeology, or to them, I think in their head, they construct that the more faithfully you can reproduce reenacting, 8th century Vikings that has some spiritual significance.
Right.
And, there's certainly things that are time honored are important and valuable, but the Vikings didn't, dress up like cavemen to be more spiritual. And I wonder what they think fundamentally happened, in the year 800 that gave one of their Gothies the significant authority to say something that we wouldn't have today.
Right.
Like, was Olaf the Viking in Trondheim back in 840 somehow have more spiritual authenticity to acknowledge that courage and discipline and industriousness are valuable?
He was
And
from
I
the
don't.
street.
There you go.
He
It's
was
from the
authentic.
streets.
He kept it real.
He kept it real. Well, so I think that's important, though,
Right.
because rather than pretending that we're ancient Vikings, we're keeping it real.
Right.
And these truths are valuable. You can go back and look at our lore. They've always been valuable to the European folk, to the Aryan peoples. These were always noble principles.
Mm.
And to codify them in, the 1970s or 80s, we're moving forward. That's how we ought to do. If we're so stagnant that our value system has to be based on trying to role play being a Viking, then it's just a fun, why not have the Viking barbecue in the backyard and just reenact? Because at that point, we're not living a faith. We're trying to be reenactors. And there's a time and a place for that, but it's not an authentic spiritual journey to me.
And I agree. I think the logic is sound, first off. I remember I had Paul Wagner on of the werewolves, the wolves of Vinland. They're not called the werewolves. That's ridiculous. The wolves of Vinland. And but one of the things that he said that I think was perfect, and you reiterated it. It's about creating who we are, connecting to how we see the gods and our relationship with them, not necessarily reflecting that somebody else's relationship with the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree wholeheartedly. And also to the charge that this isn't part of the lore. Wasn't the lore written by somebody of?
Yeah, it is now.
Like it's kind of like this is how we make lore, right?
It's part of the modern lore.
Right. And I think that's fair. That's valid. I understand, obviously both perspectives, but I also, as somebody who's very skeptical, and like I got trust issues, Matt. I'll be honest with you. I got some serious trust issues, and when somebody's dead, it's like they really can't fuck me over. So things that they've written, like it is what it is. But I've met many a charlatan in my time. And so I get the skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a certain level it's healthy. But I also think with this specifically, I think there's a valid a case for, well, this is the modern lore, and
Mm-hmm.
if you can't say that this is in conflict with the lore, then why would you, put up a resistance against it? You know what I mean?
Well, there's a difference between when you're looking at this as a real thing and when you're analyzing it as an obscure point of historical trivia. And I think that when you contemplate it as an actual faith and not just some strange thing Vikings did, it prompts you to make some of those decisions and to think about it.
Mm.
At some point in the way back, the Gothies that had the trust of their community made decisions for their folk of what was right, what was wrong, and what was healthy for their people. When people accepted those and saw they were beneficial and those lasted over time, they become codified and something that was agreed upon. One of the cool things about the Nine Noble Virtues, and one of the reasons that I don't try to remake them or, no, this is the special, Matt Flavel remix, is because they have been around and they've served us really well. And they are time honored. They're not ancient, but they're 50 years old, and they're really nice things. And certainly we can add to them over time. We can build upon them. But we always need to be building and striving for something better. That's something that that we've always done, is strive to achieve more, to innovate, to accomplish, and to do more. And so I think that in a modern sense, we have to be building. We can't just be aping what our ancestors did. We have to do more and rise to the challenges that our folk face right here, right now. That's certainly what they did then, and that's what their ancestors did before them.
Right. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Winding down, people who are interested in connecting with the AFA, what are the different ways that people can connect with you?
Well, the hub for all of it is www.runestone.org. Clifford Erickson, one of our WIT members, has put so much time into making our new website look nice and function well. That will give you a way to connect with your local folk builder, with any Gothar that are in your area. It'll help you read our core documents. It shows events that are going on, and that really helps you get connected. And it's got a very active news section. So everybody, I would encourage you to go there. Go there if you like us. Go there if you don't like us. Go there if you just want to know more about us. Just go to the website and check it out. Also on Facebook, our Facebook page is pretty active. You're welcome to reach out there. Asatru Folk Assembly. You'll find it should be one of the first things that pops up. You can reach out to me personally if you have any questions. Always feel free to do that. Matt Flavel, Flavel, at runestone.org is my email address. Please feel free to reach out. On that website, it's got your local folk builder. And no matter where you are, chances are we've got somebody close to you, and they can help you answer any questions you may have, get in touch with any local people if you want to find out more about us or have any questions. They're really good on that. If you have a spiritual question, and I'll say this, and I think this is important, if anybody out there within the sound of my voice, if you need to talk to somebody about something spiritual and you need help that way, please reach out to our Gothar. It's what we're here for. We'd be really happy to answer anything you may have or help you through a situation you might be dealing with. And those contacts are all on the website as well. I'll say it one more time, www.runestone.org. That really will connect you with your people locally. Your interaction with the AFA shouldn't be an internet thing, but again, like I was talking about earlier, we're using what works for modern times, and the Facebook page and the website are going to help you connect to somebody real. But the next step is actually meeting them, actually talking to them, having a phone call. And we're all very eager to do those things. So that's the best way to reach out to us.
That's awesome. If somebody wants to become more educated in Asatru, who is maybe not yet ready to make the step to connect with the organization, what would you suggest they do?
If they're not ready to actually talk to somebody, that's a little bit different. If you are and you just don't want to sign up, that's fine. Any of the people I just told you about could help direct you if with a specific question or a resource. We have books on our website that we sell that please buy our stuff. But honestly, the books we have on there will help you get a better understanding of where we're coming from and lore and things. If you're looking to buy books, one thing, Asatru, A Native European Spirituality by Steve McNallen does a really good job of basically modern Asatru one-on-one and telling you where modern Asatru came from and a little bit about Steve and the AFA and how that was started. So I'd encourage you to buy that book if you want. Another one that would be really useful is A Book of Troth by Edred Thorson. Try to get, I think, the 2003 edition or the most recent edition, and that'll help you a little bit. Don't be confused by the title. That was before the Troth became the strange universalist situation it is now. Right. But I'd also encourage you for more primary source stuff, The Culture of the Teutons by Wilhelm Groenbeck. It's a difficult read, but it's a really good one. And it's one of the books that, I could read a few pages and I just had to set it down and let it digest because some of it just blew my mind on how well it was put. So that's a really good resource for you guys to read. And then once you do it, seriously, interact. Ask somebody, reach out. just because you send an email doesn't mean you have to join, or anybody's going to be hassling you, but it does connect you with some people that would love to help.
That's great. For my listeners, it'll be a familiar theme, but I think that although it's important for an individual to create the wall, and the wall I represent as the acknowledgement of who is in tribe, who is external, ex-tribe. Although it is significant for a person to do that when it comes to allocating resources and investing energy and maintaining an individual and group identity that is, congruent, cohesive, it is also important to maintain formulas of alliance and alliance building. We need to be making allies where those allies can create a synergy with, your group or you as an individual. So even if you are somebody who is not an Asatru, not a Odinist, not a heathen, not somebody that connects with the gods of Europe, I would still say that there is value to be found in reading the adventures, the identities, the formulas that strong people during hard times, apply to their lives and the benefit that came of it. If you are somebody who does share, this history in your people, I would challenge you to explore it for, an even greater purpose, being connecting with a truth that, at some point in your life may become more familiar than you realize it ever would, and I will say, wrapping up, I really appreciate you doing this. You are probably the easiest guest I've ever had in terms of scheduling the talk. It's like, hey man, want to do this? Yeah. How about tomorrow? Sure. See you then. Boom, gets it done. That's how I am as a guest, by the way. And like when people are, sometimes you get the pomp and circumstance, well, I will check my calendar and I will have one of my people. It's like, listen, like, give me a fucking break. Like either you want to do it or you don't. But you've had none of that. You have been authentic from the first interaction, and I really, really appreciate you doing this talk.
Well, no, I'm really appreciative for you having me on. It's a good opportunity. I look forward to talking to you. So yeah, I was chomping at the bit wanting to get on and make it as easy as possible. It's a real good opportunity to be able to speak to your audience. And yeah, I look forward to getting a chance to talk about the AFA and talk about Asatru whenever I can get it. That's my life. So
right on.
Thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely. It was a privilege. I will say that I know the AFA has a function in Pennsylvania once a year, if I'm not mistaken.
Winter nights.
And, I am in PA, and just an open invitation to you and your lovely wife. My wife and I would love to have you guys over for dinner, or, to hang out and connect in any way, no pressure, but the invitation's open.
All right. This October, let's do it.
All right. Sounds awesome. All right, brother. Stand by.